There are far worse places to be than in sunny Barcelona in mid-November. I know, been pretty much lucky with the weather that we've got. But today we're looking at the Jeep Compass, which at the time of filming and in the UK will come in the launch edition with a front-wheel drive configuration and in the e-hybrid and also the fully electric powertrains. Prices will start from roughly £35,000 without adding any additional options. Although at a later date you'll also find it in a fully electric all-wheel drive model and also as a plug-in hybrid. This will give you a full comprehensive range in terms of the overall powertrain and also the battery packs that you can find. Now in this review, which will be covered in such a format, we'll see if it's actually worth its price tag and of course how it compares to some of its key competitors. So let's kick things off and talk about efficiency. And first off, you've got the regular hybrid model with a 0.9 kilowatt hour battery pack only, so therefore it'll just suffice for basic operation of the vehicle. If, however, you go for the plug-in hybrid, it's estimated that you can get a 20 kilowatt hour battery pack. That should give you a decent electric range, and combining that with the shorter commutes that a lot of people do, it means that your MPG figures, well, will be pretty good. Now we're going to be concentrating on the fully electric model. And here you have got two battery pack configurations, a 74 kilowatt hour capacity, which will give you roughly 310 miles on the WLTP mixed driving cycle. And then you have got the pretty large 97 kilowatt hour battery pack that has a range claim that goes up to roughly 400 miles. Now, the vehicle that is actually on review is the 74 kilowatt hour model, which is currently going to be available in the UK market. Now, I should point out that at the time of filming, the launch edition models have got a heat pump included as standard. And that's certainly great because it adds to the overall efficiency when it comes to heating up the cabin on those colder climate days, effectively taking heat that's dissipated from the vehicle's electronics, such as the battery pack, and then feeding it in a safe way into the cabin. Now, a heat pump might become optional at a later date, specifically in the different models. Now, the vehicle that's on review is the 74 kilowatt hour model, and from my own mixed driving test, I netted a pretty respectable 250 to 270 miles. And that's actually in line with what I would have expected with the vehicle, considering some of the others that I've reviewed from the Stellantis group, such as the Vauxhall Grandland Electric, which netted roughly 275 to 295 miles. As you'll be able to see from the mileage leaderboard, the Jeep doesn't exactly stand tall, but equally is actually still pretty respectable in terms of the overall electric range that it offers. And I do think for the vast majority of consumers, it will certainly suffice. If that is actually going to be a problem for you, then you might want to consider the larger battery pack model, or of course some of the alternatives out there on the market. Now, another thing which I actually love about modern Stellantis vehicles, such as the Jeep Compass, is that you have got customization of the regenerative braking levels. These can be achieved via the paddle shifters that are found behind the steering wheel. And if I lift off at roughly 30 kilometers an hour, the vehicle will actually start decelerating pretty harshly. If I don't want that, of course I can customize it, and on the lightest mode right now, if I were to just re-accelerate and then lift off, the vehicle will feel like it's coasting. Now, there is also a one pedal mode that can be initiated by pressing a button that can be found via the dashboard. And this one pedal mode effectively gives you exactly as the name suggests, and therefore means that if you're going to be lifting off the accelerator pedal, the vehicle will completely decelerate and also come to a standstill. So here, if I just lift off the accelerator pedal driving at roughly again 30 kilometers an hour, the vehicle does indeed decelerate and completely come to a standstill. And I really do love that. The fact that I've got that degree of customization and that one pedal mode that can be initiated by a simple press of a button is certainly appreciated. So aside from recouping energy while on the move, what about when it comes to plugging in the fully electric model? Well, here via CCS port, it'll take 160 kilowatts of input, and therefore if you do find an appropriate DC charger on the motorway, you can go from 20 to 80% in 31 minutes. That 11 kilowatt onboard charger means that if you were to plug in via a three-phase power supply and thus via its Type 2 port, you can go from 20 to 80% in 4 hours and 30 minutes. If you were to choose a regular 7 kilowatt wall box instead, this time will extend up to 6 hours and 45 minutes. Of course, it'll take a lot longer via regular 3-pin input. And it's worth pointing out over here that the Jeep Compass can actually have its onboard charger upgraded to 22 kilowatt, and this will cost an additional £600 and therefore will bring down that overall charging time, at least when connected over via Type 2 port. Moving on, we get on to driving comfort. And first off, in terms of its suspension configuration, it has got a McPherson strut setup at the front and a multi-link configuration at the rear. The combination does yield for a relatively pleasurable experience, albeit not all that perfect. By that I mean, in terms of going on the motorway, you have a pretty smooth driving feel. However, when it comes to going on potholes or speed bumps in and around town, you will sometimes feel and hear the rebound. This could be in part due to the fact that this press vehicle was fitted with the larger alloys, but nonetheless, I just thought to share my own experiences. And in this respect, it won't compete with advanced suspension setups out there on the market, or including some other vehicles from the Stellantis group, such as the Citroën lineup, which really do a tremendous job in this department. As for the driving dynamics, the vehicle doesn't quite compete with sportier SUVs. No surprise given the overall target demographic for the Jeep Compass and also its positioning. It's not exactly a vehicle that's going to really set your world alight, at least not when it comes to going around winding country routes. And in here you will find a little bit of body lean, and furthermore, there's no real connection with the front axle. This is also further emphasized with the fact that the vehicle has got a front-wheel drive or an all-wheel drive configuration. Now this does actually perfectly bring me onto performance, and here you've got the hybrid, the plug-in hybrid and the fully electric models to choose from. Concentrating on the latter, here you have got the two front-wheel drive models and also the eAWD variant as well. Here we're going to be looking at the front-wheel drive 157 kilowatt-hour model with 213 horsepower and 345 Nm of torque. It's claimed to go to 0 to 62 miles an hour in 8.5 seconds. In fact, I did put it through its paces using RaceLogic's Performance Box Touch from 0 to 20 miles an hour in 2.6 seconds, 0 to 30 miles an hour in 3.92 seconds, 0 to 60 miles an hour in 8.99 seconds, so yes, a little slower than the manufacturer's claim, and then 50 to 70 miles an hour in 4.58 seconds. I've recorded a peak acceleration of 0.37 G as well. And indeed, as you will be aware, in comparison to some of the other fully electric models out there on the market, it's not exactly going to set your world alight, in that the overall straight line speed is a little lackluster. Of course, these sort of comments kind of go out the window if we do consider the eAWD model, which really has got a lot more power and also torque. Now, it's worth mentioning over here that in terms of top speed, the fully electric models are limited to 112 miles an hour, while the hybrid models go up to 117 miles an hour. Again, not all that great, because it would have been good to have a little bit more of that unrestricted sort of speed limit, although it should suffice for the vast majority of consumers. Now, my tests were conducted on the Sport Mode preset, which gives you the best sort of throttle response and stiffens up the steering wheel. But the reason I'm highlighting this is because we're going to be talking about the select terrain modes. And this is a little toggle that can be found via the center console, allowing you to choose between Sport, Auto, Snow and Sand and Mud. Indeed, in terms of its off-roading capabilities, the Jeep Compass certainly ticks that box, even in terms of the front-wheel drive model, which was on test. Here we went on a little bit of challenging route around Barcelona's hills, and I was actually pleasantly surprised that I had no issues whatsoever when it came to traction. Indeed, the vehicle actually did do a pretty good job, and despite the terrain being pretty broken up and very bumpy, and therefore in terms of its suspension configuration did yield for a little bit more of an unpleasurable experience because of the rebound, when it came to the amount of ground clearance, the way that the front and rear bumpers had been designed, and also thanks to the select terrain modes that I was able to select from, it meant that I had a good degree of confidence even while taking the vehicle outside of an urban setting. Now, yes, of course, the overall experience would be even heightened if I was driving the eAWD model, which gives you even better traction and further capabilities in terms of taking the vehicle off-roading. So if you're going to be someone who's living on the countryside or, for example, on a farm, then you'll certainly want to consider the top spec fully electric model, not only because the amount of power and torque that it provides, but also due to the fact that you'll have a motor planted on each of those axles and therefore giving you an all-wheel drive configuration, which therefore will give you much better degree of confidence in comparison to the front-wheel drive models. So next up we go on to its interior design, and here it's not going to compete with some more premium alternatives out there on the market, but given its overall price point and also the target demographic, I do think Jeep has nailed it. from the use of hard materials that are found towards the seat upholstery, which are washable and still very comfortable. And you've also got good use of materials around the cabin, such as towards the center console, the dashboard and the door trims. Well, here you'll actually be pleasantly surprised. Furthermore, it's good to see that in terms of practicality, you've got physical buttons that are found on the steering wheel, therefore making it far more intuitive to use while you're on the move in comparison to those silly haptic and touch sensitive buttons like you'd find on some alternatives. Then you have got those paddle shifters, which are found behind the steering wheel, as I did touch upon before when it comes to regenerative braking, and then you've also got traditional stalks. Towards the center console, you've got a flurry of other buttons, such as a rotary drive mode selector and also the terrain switch as well, which has got a rubbery feel, which therefore makes it very easy to find and also initiate while you're on the move. Speaking of which, it's good that the manufacturer has used a few shortcut buttons towards the dashboard, in other words, to take you to certain menus that can be found on the infotainment system. The one that I quite like is when it comes to the ADAS menu, it's just a simple touch of a button, and then over here it gives me all the settings that I want to enable or disable while I'm on the move. And yes, you've also got a dedicated climate control button as well, which gives you all the right options that you require. Speaking of which, when it comes to the 16-inch infotainment system, you have got two permanent bars on either side, which are dedicated for your climate controls, so therefore making it a bit more intuitive to use and also interact with while you're on the move. The rest of the infotainment system itself is very customizable, vivid, and also intuitively laid out. It also supports Android Auto and Apple CarPlay over a wired and wireless transmission. Now, in terms of the secondary display, it's the one that's found just behind the steering wheel, and of course that's your instrument cluster. It sits at 10.25 inch and is also pretty customizable as well, with the different menus that you can flick between. It's all really well done, and here I've got no complaints when it comes to the use of technology. Now, as an extension to this, you can also add a head-up display. This will find within a pack, and this will give you your traversing speed among some other information such as your safety systems projected right in front of you, and therefore means that it keeps your eyes planted on the road and therefore bolstering your overall safety credentials. Elsewhere, you have also got the ability of upgrading the audio system to a premium sound system, and yes, there's not much information that I've been able to obtain from the manufacturer, at least not at the time of filming, and this should supposedly give you a better audio reproduction across the cabin in comparison to the stock sound system that is comprised within the Jeep Compass. So what about when it comes to storage within the cabin? Well, here the glove box itself is relatively large, although it's worth pointing out that given the sort of track record of Stellantis vehicles, I wouldn't be surprised that it wouldn't be fully optimized for right-hand drive vehicles. Nonetheless, towards the center console and at the top of it, you've got a retractable area, which reveals a small little storage bay and also two cup holders. Further down, you have got an angled wireless charging bay, which comes included across the entire trim range, which is certainly appreciated, and it's also got a non-slip material, preventing your phone from flying backwards. Then you've also got the center armrest compartment, which is actually pretty large. You've also got a small little tray, which can be handy for placing your key fob. Then towards the dashboard, you've also got some other areas as well, which make it even more handy when it comes to storing extra goods. As the rear of the center console, you've also got a small little cutout, which can be handy for placing a smaller size smartphone, and also just below it, potentially, for example, a power bank. Here you'll also find some USB Type-C ports and a 12-volt socket. There are also two further USB Type-C ports at the front of the center console, which are used to provide charge and also connect up to the infotainment system. In terms of the door bins, the front two are pretty large and will easily accommodate a 500ml bottle alongside some small to medium sized valuables. As for the rear two, they're unsurprisingly a little bit more limited, but still very capable. And here you've also got a pull down armrest compartment which reveals two cup holders. Of course, when it comes to storage, we have to talk about its boot, and here you've got 550 litres to play around with. And if you drop down the seats, this figure should extend to 1,645 litres. This is an unofficial figure that was taken by me from other Stellantis vehicles that I've reviewed on a similar sort of platform. But indeed, no matter what sort of figure you actually take, the overall capacity that you'll be able to notice yourself is absolutely humongous. You'll have no issues whatsoever when it comes to taking your weekly shops or several larger sized luggage. It's also good to see that you've got fantastic practicality with a hatchback design and an electric tailgate that comes fitted as standard. You've also got 40-20-40 rear split folding seats, making it even better when it comes to taking elongated goods. You've also got a flat loading bay and a pretty sizable underfloor compartment. The only thing to consider, however, is that there is no frunk, in other words, a storage compartment underneath the bonnet. Not a massive deal, but just something I thought I should point out, especially if you're going to be comparing and contrasting it with some of its competitors. Elsewhere, you have got a towing capacity of 1,000 to 1,150, and this is present on both the hybrid and the fully electric models, which is actually pretty decent given some of its competitors offer far lower sort of towing capacity or none whatsoever. Aside from transporting goods, what about when it comes to giving someone a lift? Well, the seats at the front and at the rear are very accommodating and soft, no issues whatsoever. In terms of headroom and legroom, they're not too bad. As someone who's just under 6 foot, I didn't feel hemmed in at the rear of the cabin. And given the fact that the footwell design has been optimized, especially for the fully electric platform, it means that even your rear middle occupant can be sat for longer periods of time without any discomfort. Now, it's worth highlighting over here that the front 2 seats, as standard and across the entire trim ranges, are heated, and so is the steering wheel, which is very much appreciated. However, should you want the front 2 seats to be electronically operated with a ventilation and a massage function, you're going to have to splash out a whopping £1,700, at least at the time of filming, for the Premium Pack First Edition. This is actually quite disheartening, considering some of its competitors do offer some of these features as standard. Speaking of which, if you want the pictured sunroof, which does bring in some nice light within the cabin, then you'll also have to splash out an additional £1,200. No surprise in this department, because a lot of its competitors don't offer a full panoramic roof, although there are certain vehicles out there that do offer it, and therefore if that's something that you're looking for, it's just something that you will have to consider, namely if you had your heart set on the Jeep Compass. Speaking of which, there's no doubt that this vehicle has got Jeep's DNA running through it. And sure enough, certain individuals will say that it's really much evolved from the previous generation models, but still I actually quite like its overall exterior design. But I'd be curious to know what you make of it down in the comment section below. As I did mention in terms of its off-roading capabilities, the front and the rear are somewhat truncated, and therefore do kind of look a little bit different from some other SUVs. Nonetheless, I do like the fact of how the headlights are, and in terms of that sort of blocky design, it kind of fits in terms of its robust look to it. You've also got between 18 and 20-inch alloys to choose from, depending on the trim level chosen or indeed options. Its side profile has got also a nice silhouette, and as for the rear, you've got that sort of tech-focused look to it, just due to how the taillights kind of cross between themselves. You've also got that elongated tail light bar, which has got the illuminated Jeep logo as well. Frankly, when it comes to its exterior design, that sort of blocky look certainly does look the part. As for the overall colour options, it comes in the pictured green as standard, which I absolutely love. If, however, you want some of the other colour finishes, it'll set you back an additional £800, and if you want a vehicle with a black roof, it'll cost you over £1,200. Moving on from its exterior design, it brings me on to safety. And at the time of filming, it's not been tested by Euro NCAP, so I can't give you any sort of crash analysis. However, I can talk about the driver assistance systems. And here you have got level 2 autonomous driving capabilities, with adaptive cruise control, which does work a treat on the motorway by keeping you at a safe distance from the leading vehicle without feeling too jerky. Then you've got lane positioning assist, forward collision warning, automatic emergency braking, and should you want to up the ante, you might want to go for the ADAS pack for an additional £1,500, as this brings predictive adaptive cruise control, rear cross traffic alert, active blind spot detection, and semi-automated lane change. There's also the head-up display that I did reference before. Indeed, it's good to see that some of these features do come fitted as standard, although it would have been further appreciated if all of them were as standard, as it would have put it a little bit more in line with some of its modern competitors. Now, it is also worth highlighting that these driver assistance systems will become re-enabled every single time you power on the vehicle, and therefore if you do want to disable them, you'll have to navigate via the infotainment system. Thankfully, there's a few shortcut buttons that the manufacturers provided, therefore adding to the overall convenience and ease of use of the vehicle. Now, to conclude, I would like to talk about parking and visibility. And first off, on the latter, the frontal vision is decent, although the positioning of the rear view mirror, very much like other Stellantis vehicles, is a little further down the windscreen for my liking. Of course, that is actually quite subjective. As for the side, you've got really nice wide openings, making it very easy to check for your blind spot. And in terms of the rear, well, you've got an integrated wiper and also a pretty large window. Of course, over here you've got front and rear parking sensors and also a rear view camera, which give you a little bit of extra peace of mind when it comes to parking it. Speaking of which, you can go for the convenience pack, which will cost you an additional £700, and this will give you blind spot monitoring camera system, lateral sensors, and a 360-degree camera system as well. So with all that in mind, it brings us on to our verdict of the Jeep Compass, specifically the fully electric model. And in all honesty, I do think Stellantis, or indeed the Jeep, have actually done a pretty decent job across the board. It's a pretty stylish vehicle inside and out. It's also pretty practical with the use of buttons which are customizable to a certain degree. And then you've also got a good use of technology, driver assistance systems, and a good amount of boot capacity and legroom for your rear occupants. Combining all of this at its price point of roughly £35,000, and I do think here the Jeep Compass will really much stand tall in comparison to some of its competitors, including its siblings from the Stellantis group. And as a result of this, it gets our Best Buy award. Now I'd be curious to know what you make of it down in the comment section below, and how you feel it compares to some of the other C-segment SUVs out there on the market. If you've enjoyed this detailed independent review, definitely do consider dropping a like, subscribing, and hitting that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Chris from TotallyEV, and I hopefully see you next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.